My name is Natalie Brooks. I am 34 years old. 11 months ago, my boss started demanding I stay late almost every night at the clinic while ignoring my family obligations. I recently discovered she had been having an affair with my husband for nearly 2 years. Right now, I am sitting in the clinic's main conference room while my boss tells the entire staff she is eliminating my position as administrator, and my 7-year-old son is waiting just outside the door. My parents and sister are on the video call my boss set up, and they are backing her up completely. I feel my world crumbling, but I vow to protect my son and expose the truth no matter what it takes. If you have ever sat across from the one person who could destroy both your career and your family in a single meeting, hit that like button and tell me in the comments how you would handle it. I really need to know I am not the only one who has been blindsided like this. The conference room felt smaller than usual that afternoon, with the whole staff gathered around the long table and the video screen glowing at the end. My boss, Victoria Lang, stood at the head in her crisp navy blazer, the one she always wore when she wanted to look in control. She had called this emergency all hands meeting right after lunch and insisted every employee bring their immediate family if they could. My husband had dropped our son off at the front desk, saying he had an errand, but would be back soon. I thought it was strange, but I stayed focused on keeping my breathing steady. My boss cleared her throat and smiled that tight professional smile that never reached her eyes. She started with the usual corporate talk about efficiency, but then her tone sharpened. She looked straight at me and said the billing department had uncovered serious discrepancies, and that as administrator, I had failed to catch them. The room went quiet. I opened my mouth to defend myself because I had actually flagged those exact issues months earlier, only for her to dismiss them. But my boss cut me off with a wave of her hand. She continued in that cold, sarcastic voice she reserved for people she'd already decided were problems. Natalie, you have been a liability for a while now, always questioning processes and putting your personal life ahead of the team. The staff needs leadership that puts the clinic first, and unfortunately, that is no longer you. Effective immediately, your position is eliminated. We will be bringing in someone with fresh perspective to streamline things. The words landed like a slap, and I felt my cheeks burn while my coworker Jenna Morales shifted beside me and squeezed my hand under the table. On the video call, my mother nodded slowly and said in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear that she had worried about this for months, and that sometimes a change is what a person needs to finally step up. My father cleared his throat and added that I had always been too focused on my own way of doing things and that the clinic deserved better. My younger sister leaned into the camera with a pitying look and said she hoped this would finally teach me to prioritize properly. I sat there stunned because these were the same people who had encouraged me to take the administrator role 3 years earlier when the clinic expanded. My boss kept going as if their words were the most natural thing in the world. She pulled up a slide showing supposed errors in my reports and highlighted them with a red laser pointer. The numbers were twisted, of course, but she presented them as proof of negligence. She mentioned the clinic's insurance policy on key employees and how the payout structure would help cover the transition costs. That was when my stomach dropped because I knew my husband and I had a joint policy through the clinic for $125,000, and my boss had access to all those records as director. Jenna Morales spoke up, then her voice steady, but clearly nervous. She reminded the room that I had actually caught several billing issues last quarter and forwarded them to my boss directly. My boss turned on her with that same cutting sarcasm. Jenna, I appreciate your loyalty, but this is not the time for personal friendships to cloud professional judgment. Natalie has been warned repeatedly, and the decision is final. The HR director, Marcus Hale, who had been silent the whole time, simply nodded and slid a termination packet across the table toward me without meeting my eyes. I felt the blood drain from my face as the reality sank in. This was not just a firing, this was a coordinated move, and the video call with my family felt staged like they had rehearsed their lines. I thought back to the past 11 months, the late nights my boss had demanded, the strange texts my husband had started deleting from his phone, and the way my sister had suddenly started visiting the clinic more often under the guise of bringing lunch. It all clicked into place in the worst way possible. My boss wrapped up the meeting by saying the clinic would provide 2 weeks severance, which was generous under the circumstances, and that she expected me to clear my desk by the end of the day. She looked straight at the camera and thanked my family for their support during this difficult transition. My mother actually smiled on screen and said, "We are all just trying to do what is best for everyone." The call ended and the staff began filing out, avoiding my eyes, except for Jenna Morales, who stayed behind and whispered that she had seen my boss and my husband leaving together after hours twice last month. I stood up on shaky legs and walked out to the waiting area where my 7-year-old son was playing with a tablet Jenna Morales had given him earlier. He looked up at me with those big trusting eyes and asked if we could go home now because he was hungry. I hugged him tight, trying not to let him see how badly my hands were shaking. That was when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was short, but it stopped my heart. "Check the shared drive folder marked confidential. You are not the only one who knows what is really going on." I opened the clinic's internal drive on my phone, and there it was, a folder I had never seen before, filled with screenshots of messages between my boss and my husband. The dates went back nearly 2 years. The language was unmistakable. My boss wrote things like, "Once she is out of the picture, we can finally stop hiding," and my husband replied that the insurance payout would give them the fresh start they deserved. One message from just last week mentioned the team building family day as the perfect opportunity to make the transition look natural. My breath caught as I realized the meeting had been the beginning of something much larger. My boss had used her power to publicly destroy my reputation in front of the entire staff, and my own family had helped her do it. I looked down at my son, who was now leaning against my leg, and felt a fierce protectiveness rise up inside me. I could not let this stand. I could not let my boss take everything from us without a fight. Just then, the conference room door opened again, and my boss stepped out with Marcus Hale right behind her. She saw me standing there with my son, and that same sarcastic smile crept across her face. She walked over and said in a voice low enough that only I could hear, "Oh, Natalie, I hope you are not planning to make this ugly. Some things are better for everyone if they stay quiet." My son looked up at her curiously, and she ruffled his hair like nothing was wrong. The gesture made my skin crawl. I slipped the phone into my pocket and forced myself to stay calm for my son's sake. Jenna Morales appeared at my side again and offered to walk us to the car. As we left the building, I could feel my boss's eyes on my back. The text from the unknown number had come from inside the clinic, and I knew someone was on my side, but I had no idea who or how far they were willing to go. The drive home felt endless with my son, chattering about his day at school, and me trying to hold it together. When we pulled into the driveway of our small house in the lakeside suburb, I saw my sister's car already parked there. She got out and walked toward me with that same pitying expression from the video call. She said my parents had asked her to come over and talk some sense into me before I did anything rash. I told her I knew about the affair and the plan, but she just shook her head and said I was imagining things again, just like I always did when things did not go my way. The words stung, but they also hardened something inside me. This was not imagination. This was my boss, using every ounce of her authority to erase me, and my family was helping her do it. That night, after my son was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table and opened the folder again. The messages were even worse the second time. My boss had promised my husband a promotion for him at his construction job if he helped convince me to step away quietly. My parents had been offered a small monthly stipend to support the story that I was unstable and unreliable. My sister had been promised a part-time position at the clinic once I was gone. It was all there in black and white, and it made me feel sick to my stomach. The next morning, I called the only person I trusted completely. Jenna Morales answered on the first ring and agreed to meet me at a coffee shop near the lake. She brought printed copies of some of the messages she had secretly saved and told me she had seen my boss and my husband together at a restaurant 2 towns over just last weekend. She also said Marcus Hale, the HR director, had looked uncomfortable during the meeting and might be willing to listen if I approached him carefully. I felt a small spark of hope, but it was quickly drowned out by the fear of what my boss would do next if she found out I was fighting back. Later that afternoon, my phone rang. It was my mother. She sounded concerned on the surface, but the words were pure pressure. She said my boss had reached out and explained everything and that it would be best for my son if I accepted the severance and moved on without causing a scene. She reminded me that my sister had a family to think about too, and that rocking the boat would only hurt everyone. I listened to her talk and felt the betrayal settle deep in my bones. My own mother was choosing my boss over me. I hung up and stared out the window at the lake in the distance. The water looked calm, but I knew how quickly it could turn dangerous, just like my boss, just like the life I thought I had. I pulled my son close when he came running in from the backyard and promised him silently that I would get us through this. But as the sun started to set, I received another text. This one was from my boss herself. It was short and sharp. Do not make me regret keeping this civil, Natalie. Some accidents are easier to explain than others. My heart pounded as I read it again. The threat was veiled but unmistakable. I looked at my son playing with his toys on the living room floor and knew I could not ignore it. The fight was just beginning, and my boss had already drawn the battle lines in front of everyone who mattered. I had no idea how far she would go, but I was about to find out the hard way. The next morning, I dropped my son off at school, trying to keep my voice light, when he asked why I was not going to work like usual. I told him I had some important meetings and hugged him a little tighter than normal before heading straight to the coffee shop by the lake where Jenna Morales was already waiting with a thick folder on the table between us. She slid the papers across without a word, her face serious in the early light. These are copies of every email chain I could pull before my boss locked down the shared drive last night, she said quietly. My boss had been planning this for months, using her authority to reroute clinic funds into a side account that only she and my husband could access. Jenna Morales had risked her own job to save the screenshots because she had overheard my boss on a call bragging about how easy it would be once I was gone. I flipped through the pages, my stomach twisting at the casual way my boss wrote about me as if I were some disposable obstacle in her path to the perfect life with my husband. We were only halfway through the stack when my phone lit up with a call from Marcus Hale, the HR director. I answered on speaker so Jenna Morales could listen, and his voice came through tense but clear. Natalie, I cannot talk long, but I saw the termination packet, and something about it does not sit right with me. He paused and added in a rush that he had been pressured by my boss to sign off on the discrepancies without a full audit. When I pressed him on why he had stayed silent in the meeting, he let out a short, forced laugh that sounded more like deflection than amusement and said, Look, I have a family to feed too, but I will review the files quietly if you send me what you have. It was not the support I wanted, but at least it was not outright refusal, and his reaction felt like the first crack in the wall my boss had built around herself. Jenna Morales nodded encouragingly after I hung up, but warned me that Marcus Hale could still flip if my boss leaned on him harder. We spent the next hour copying everything onto a secure thumb drive, and I thanked her for standing by me when no one else would. As we stood to leave, she squeezed my arm and said one more thing. Natalie, your boss sent an all-staff email this morning announcing your departure as a voluntary move for personal reasons, and she attached a glowing recommendation letter that basically called you unreliable in code. The public exposure had already started, and I could feel the rapid collapse of my reputation picking up speed. I drove home with the thumb drive, burning a hole in my pocket, determined to confront my husband before he could spin his own story. My husband was in the kitchen when I walked in, looking surprised to see me back so early. I did not waste time on pleasantries. I know about you and my boss, I said, holding up my phone. with one of the message screenshots displayed. He froze for a second, then tried to laugh it off, the same awkward way Marcus Hale had, but it came out sharper, like he was already on the defensive. You are blowing this out of proportion, Natalie, he snapped, suddenly changing the subject to how stressed I had been at the clinic lately and how maybe this firing was a blessing in disguise. The shift felt calculated, and it only made the betrayal cut deeper because he was using the exact language my boss had fed him in those emails. Before I could push back, my phone rang again, and this time it was my mother. I put her on speaker without thinking because I wanted my husband to hear every word. She started right in with that concerned tone that always masked control, saying my boss had called her directly after the meeting and explained how my attitude had become a real problem for the team. Your father and I agree it is time you step back, she continued. And when my father jumped in from the background, it was not the quiet agreement I expected. He let out a defensive outburst, telling me I had always been too headstrong for my own good, and that fighting this would only make our son suffer in the long run. The way he raised his voice, then quickly tried to soften it with a comment about family unity, felt completely different from their video call performance, and it left me stunned at how unpredictable their support for my boss had become. My husband seized the moment to pile on, claiming my mother was right, and that I should take the 2 week severance and focus on being a better mom instead of chasing some vendetta. I felt the words like fresh cuts because they were straight from the psychological jabs my boss had been perfecting for nearly 2 years. I told them all I had proof and that I was not going down without exposing everything, but my sister texted me in the middle of the call with a message that made my blood run cold. She wrote that she had just accepted the part-time position at the clinic and that if I knew what was good for our son, I would keep my mouth shut. The family pressure was closing in from every side, and it was all flowing directly from my boss, who had turned them into her willing extensions. I ended the call and stared at my husband across the kitchen table, watching him avoid my eyes while he scrolled through his phone. The man I had built a life with for over a decade was suddenly a stranger, and I realized the affair had changed him in ways I had missed until it was too late. Jenna Morales sent me a quick text, then asking if I had talked to Marcus Hale yet, because she had just seen my boss storm into his office looking furious. That was the first mini cliffhanger of the afternoon, because seconds later, Marcus Hale himself called me back, his voice lower this time. Natalie, I just got out of a meeting with my boss, and she knows you have copies of the messages he said. She is threatening to file a harassment claim against you if you do not drop this. And she mentioned something about an anonymous tip to child services, questioning your stability as a parent. My heart slammed against my ribs as the words sank in. My boss was not just firing me anymore. She was coming after my ability to keep my son safe, and she was using every ounce of her authority to make it look legitimate. My husband overheard the call, and his face went pale, but instead of defending me, he muttered that maybe I should listen before things got worse. I hung up on Marcus Hale and turned to my husband, demanding to know how he could stand there and let this happen, but he only shrugged and said my boss had promised him a better life for all of us if I just cooperated. The admission hung in the air like a threat, and I felt the ground shift under me again. I grabbed the thumb drive and told my husband I was taking our son to stay with a friend for a few days until I could sort this out. He did not try to stop me, which hurt almost as much as the betrayal itself, but at least it gave me space to think. As I packed a small bag, my mother called one more time, and this time her voice had lost the fake concern entirely. She said my boss had offered them a monthly stipend to help with any legal fees if things turned ugly, and that my father was already on board because he believed I needed help seeing reason. When my father chimed in again, his reaction was a sudden topic change to how proud they were of my sister for stepping up at the clinic, which only proved how deep the manipulation ran. I left the house with my son in the back seat, asking innocent questions about why we were going on an adventure, and I forced myself to smile for him while my mind raced. Jenna Morales met us at a quiet park near the lake and handed me a burner phone she had picked up on her lunch break. Use this for anything sensitive, she whispered, and keep the original one for show, so my boss does not suspect you are building a case. We sat on a bench while my son played nearby, and Jenna Morales laid out the next steps, including contacting a labor lawyer she knew who specialized in workplace retaliation. The plan felt solid, but every second I waited, I could feel my boss tightening the noose. Just as we were wrapping up, my burner phone buzzed with an unknown number, and when I answered, a distorted voice said, I have more evidence, but you need to meet me tonight at the old warehouse district by the lake. No cops. The caller hung up before I could ask who it was, and I stared at the screen, my pulse racing. Jenna Morales looked at me with wide eyes and said, that could be the break we need, or it could be a trap set by my boss to discredit you further. I slipped the phone into my pocket, knowing I had to go because the alternative was letting my boss win without a fight. That evening, after my son was settled with Jenna Morales at her apartment, I drove to the meeting spot alone, the warehouses looming dark against the water. A figure stepped out of the shadows, and I recognized Marcus Hale, his face drawn and nervous. He handed me another stack of documents, without preamble, whispering that my boss had been doctoring performance reviews for months to justify the firing, and that he had recorded her latest threat in his office. But before he could play the recording, my phone lit up with a text from my boss herself. It read simply, you really should have stayed quiet, Natalie. Check your email. I opened it on the spot, and there was a formal complaint filed with the state board accusing me of misconduct and attaching what looked like doctored evidence from the clinic accounts. Marcus Hale cursed under his breath and said, this is escalating faster than I thought. The public exposure was turning into a rapid collapse, and my boss had just made her next move from the top of her hierarchy, leaving me with almost no ground left to stand on. I thanked him for the risk he was taking, but as we turned to leave, another text came, through this one from my sister. It was a photo of my son at school, earlier that day, with a caption that chilled me to the bone. Cute kid, would be a shame if his mom lost custody over all this drama. The threat was no longer veiled, and I realized my boss had pulled every string, including my own family, to make sure I understood the cost of fighting back. I drove away from the warehouses, with my hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles went white, knowing the confrontation was coming sooner than I wanted. My boss had turned a simple firing into a full-scale war, and the people I once trusted were now her weapons. My son was safe for the night, but the clock was ticking, and the next move could change everything permanently. The drive back to Jenna Morales' apartment felt like it took forever, with the lake lights blurring past my windshield and my mind replaying every sharp jab my boss had thrown at me in that conference room. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting her car to appear, but the road stayed empty. When I finally walked in, Jenna Morales had my son tucked into the guest bed already, and she handed me a fresh cup of coffee without asking questions. We sat at her kitchen counter going over the new documents Marcus Hale had risked giving me, and for the first time I felt like I might actually have a fighting chance against the authority abuse that had upended my life. The next morning, I met with a labor lawyer named Amanda Torres, who Jenna Morales had recommended after a late-night text. Amanda Torres was sharp and no-nonsense in her downtown office, overlooking the lake, and she listened to the whole story without interrupting once. She flipped through the thumb drive files, her eyes narrowing at the insurance payout references, and the messages where my boss bragged about using her position to clear the way for her and my husband. This is textbook retaliation and abuse of authority, she said flatly. We can file a formal complaint with the state board and the clinic's oversight committee, but we need one more piece to make it stick. She suggested I reach out to a board member she knew, named Dr. Philip Grant, who had a reputation for hating when directors played God with staff lives. I left her office with a plan and a court date set for the following week, but the fear of what my boss would do in the meantime sat heavy in my chest. That same afternoon, my phone rang, and it was my boss herself. She did not bother with pleasantries. Natalie, I heard you have been busy chatting with lawyers and digging through things that do not belong to you, she said, her voice dripping with that familiar cold sarcasm. Let me be very clear. If you pursue this, the board will see exactly how unstable you have been, and your little custody concerns with our son will become very real, very fast. She paused, then added that my husband had already signed paperwork, naming her as a character reference for any future disputes, and that my parents had done the same. The threat landed exactly where she wanted it, and I could hear the smile in her tone when she finished with some things are better handled quietly before they explode in public. I hung up shaking, but I immediately called Dr. Philip Grant, like Amanda Torres had suggested. He agreed to a private meeting at a neutral coffee shop near the clinic, and when I showed him the evidence, his face hardened. I have suspected my boss was overstepping. For a while he admitted, but this is beyond the pale. He promised to bring the matter to an emergency board session the next day and warned me that things might get uglier before they got better. The call ended on a note of cautious hope, but as I drove to pick my son up from school, I received a text from my sister. It was a screenshot of an email my boss had forwarded to the whole family, claiming I had been spreading false rumors to ruin her reputation. My mother followed up with a voice message saying she and my father were done being pulled into my drama and that they would support my sister's new role at the clinic instead. Their reactions felt raw and final, like they had chosen their side without a second thought. The board meeting happened 2 days later, and I was not allowed inside, but Amanda Torres sat in as my representative. She texted me updates every few minutes while I waited in the parking lot with my son playing on his tablet beside me. My boss had stormed in, according to the messages, and tried to turn the whole thing around by accusing me of harassment and leaking confidential patient information. Dr. Philip Grant shut her down quickly with the evidence we had provided, and the room apparently went silent when the affair messages were read aloud. My boss's voice carried through the cracked door at one point as she delivered one last vicious jab loud enough for the hallway to hear. Natalie always did love playing the victim, she sneered. Some people just cannot handle real responsibility. The words cut deep even from a distance because they echoed every time she had undermined me in front of the staff. When Amanda Torres finally emerged, she looked exhausted but satisfied. The board voted to suspend my boss pending a full investigation, she told me quietly. They offered you reinstatement with back pay and a formal apology, but only if you sign an NDA about the personal details. I felt a rush of relief that the authority abuse was finally cracking, but Amanda Torres's next words tempered it fast. Your reputation at the clinic is damaged beyond repair, Natalie. Even with reinstatement, the staff will always wonder, and your family has already started distancing themselves publicly. My husband had apparently filed for separation that morning, citing irreconcilable differences, and my parents had posted on their social media about supporting my sister through a difficult family transition. The partial victory tasted bitter because I knew I could never go back to that building without feeling like the outsider my boss had painted me as. I took the settlement offer after talking it over with Amanda Torres and Jenna Morales late that night. It gave me enough to cover 6 months of expenses and legal fees while I looked for something new, but it also meant signing away my right to speak publicly about the affair or the way my boss had weaponized her position. My son and I moved out of our lakeside house the following weekend, and I found a small rental apartment 2 towns over where no one knew our story. Jenna Morales helped pack the last boxes, and Marcus Hale even stopped by with a quiet goodbye card from a few sympathetic coworkers. The support from them felt real and chosen in a way my blood family never had, but the loss still ached every time my son asked why we could not see Grandma and Grandpa anymore. My mother called one last time the day before we left town. Her voice was clipped, and she did not waste time on fake concern. We have decided it is best for everyone if we step back, she said. Your father agrees that you need space to figure things out, and my sister is thriving at the clinic now, so we are focusing on that. When my father chimed in from the background, his reaction was a sudden defensive outburst about how I had brought all this on myself by not listening, and then he quickly changed the subject to how proud they were of the new direction the family was taking. It stung, but it also freed me in a strange way because I finally saw that their loyalty had always been to whoever held the power, not to me. My boss resigned 2 weeks later under pressure from the board, but she walked away with her license intact and a generous exit package. My husband moved in with her shortly after, and I heard through Jenna Morales that they were already planning a fresh start on the other side of the state. I kept my promise to my son that we would build something better, and I started working as a medical office coordinator at a smaller practice near our new apartment. The pay was less and the hours were longer, but no one there knew my history, and the quiet felt like a kind of peace. Jenna Morales visited every other weekend, and Dr. Philip Grant even sent a recommendation letter that helped me land the job. Those chosen connections became my new foundation, while the old ones crumbled away for good. Looking back now, 6 months later, I realize I won the fight to keep my son and my dignity, but I lost the family I thought I had and the career I had built for over a decade. The settlement gave me breathing room, but the whispers followed me for a while, and some doors in this town stayed closed because of the scandal. My son still has nightmares about the day everything changed, but he smiles more these days, and that makes every hard choice worth it. True family turned out to be the people who stood up when my boss tried to erase me, not the ones who helped her do it. I chose myself and my son in the end, and even though the cost was higher than I ever imagined, I would not trade that freedom for anything. Thank you for listening to my story. It still feels raw to say out loud, but sharing it here has helped me breathe a little easier. If you have ever had someone in power turn your whole world upside down and leave you picking up pieces while keeping a brave face for your kids, tell me in the comments what you held onto to get through it. I read every single one, and it reminds me I am not walking this road alone.